release of Commanding Heights for Global Transportation. Thank you so much for joining us. SAFE, for those who do not know us, is an organization founded to advance transformative transportation technology to increase energy security and reduce oil dependence. We were founded in 2004 and quickly came together with leading retired military leaders and business executives to educate on the threat of oil dependence to US economic and national security, and have been involved in this debate ever since. As leading advocates for the electrification of transportation and supporters of new connected transportation technology and business models, we grew increasingly concerned about the risks to the US from China controlling the markets and supply chains. We started working on this paper and its recommendations over a year ago, and we look forward to working hard like we have in the past with previous recommendations to ensure that this report is understood widely and implemented by US policy makers. I want to thank SAFE team for all their hard work, Jeff Gerlach and Ron Minsk on the policy team, Goran Wokade and Guido and Fien for organizing this event, Alex Adams for the PR, and Alex Hutkin and Ladine Freemuth, who have worked on the Hill. I also want to thank our 3 Energy Security Leadership Council members who are here today with us. The ESLC is the backbone of SAFE. It's their tireless work and dedication to this country that makes them such a powerful voice. We'll hear from Admiral Dennis Blair, the chairman of SAFE and former commander of the Pacific Command, then Adam Goldstein, former vice chair of Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. And then after I present our report and recommendations, from General Jim Conway, the 34th Commandant to the Marine Corps. Both Adam and General Conway serve as co-chairs of our Energy Security Leadership Council. You're welcome to submit any questions at any time in the YouTube chat box, and keep the conversation going on Twitter using the hashtag #TranspoHeights. Okay, Admiral Blair, take it away.
Well, again, thanks very much, Robbie. Can you hear me now? Okay, I come at issues like energy and transportation from a national security perspective, and I have a pretty simple definition of national security. We're secure when our foreign enemies or our competitors cannot jerk us around. It's really as simple as that. The best armed forces in the world play an important role in our national security because in the end, enemies don't jerk us around because we can make them pay. But too often, we don't take timely actions here at home to make us secure in the future. We allow vulnerabilities to develop because of short-term incentives, short-term thinking. And over time, those vulnerabilities become so severe that we have to use our military and other forms of national power to compensate for things we should have done here at home long ago. So in the past, we allowed oil-producing countries to jerk us around because our transportation sector was over 90% dependent on oil. We had to use our armed forces, our diplomacy to ensure an adequate supply of affordable energy during inevitable supply shortages. Things have changed. Now we have a prospect of many more electric vehicles coming into our fleet. Electricity as a fuel source is domestic, it's inexpensive, it's stable. And when this happens, and it's happening faster and faster every day, we'll be much more secure from OPEC plus. Saudi Arabia, Russia, and their buddies in that organization will not be able to jerk us around. But in the process, we risk forming a new national security vulnerability. China has jumped ahead in the race to dominate the international electric vehicle industry and the international supply chains that provide the essential components of those vehicles, battery components, other rare earth metals. And China has gained this lead, partly, it's true, by admirable hard work, but also by many illegal and unfair mercantilist practices. And if the United States just thinks short term, as we did originally on oil, China's dominance will soon hollow out the American automobile industry. There will be business and job losses in one of the largest and most important sectors of the American economy. We will lose the manufacturing sector, the largest manufacturing sector in the country, the sector that was the arsenal of democracy in World War II, and more recently was turned to building ventilators so that we would have enough in our hospitals to deal with COVID-19. But more important to me than these bad effects is that, left unchecked, this trend will allow China to jack us around, to jerk us around. Or put a little bit more elegantly, it will concede a very powerful and dangerous lever to a country that makes no secret of its ambitions to displace the United States as the world's most powerful country. But we can change this picture. We can control our destiny. We can deny China that leverage. And that's what the recommendations of this report that we released today are all about. We'll discuss them in detail over the next couple of hours. And to start that, let me turn now to Adam Goldstein, who's the co-chair of the Energy Security Leadership Coalition, and his day job is the global chairman of the Cruise Line International Association. Adam, over to you.
Thank you very much, Admiral Blair. It's a privilege to speak on this topic today. Frankly, it's been a privilege to serve on the Energy Security Leadership Council for the last 15 years. The original reason for me to join the ESLC, and frankly for business leaders to be involved, was the amazing destruction of economic value that oil price volatility, particularly spikes up in those days, wreaked on the economic performance and security of the United States. As you've heard, with 90% of the transportation sector dependent on oil. And as a company, having been in a sector, or being in a sector that is a heavy transportation provider, we felt the injury to our business model. And not only we, but spikes upward in oil price reliably produced recessions in the United States going back 100 years. Of course, remarkable changes have happened since 2005, not least of which is that the United States somewhat unexpectedly became the world's largest oil producer. And yet, if anything, it seems there has been more volatility since then, not less. And not only have we been concerned about spikes up like we were 15 years ago, we've now become concerned about spikes down in the oil price in terms of its effect on our domestic oil and gas industry. And we've also become, of course, much, much more cognizant of the environmental impacts of the dependency on oil as a fuel source. So today's reasons for being involved on behalf of business include the original reasons, but they also include a sense of tremendous opportunity. If we can make the adjustments that Admiral Blair was talking about, we have opportunity geopolitically, economically, militarily, and environmentally to improve the future trajectory of our country. But as he said, we cannot exchange a dependency on Middle Eastern countries for oil to a dependency on China and others for the electric vehicle supply chain. And businesses and the country need to do very important risk mitigation, generally in terms of national and economic security, but also very specifically in terms of the country's innovation and research and development capabilities that are often supported and spearheaded by the automotive sector. From a business sensibility, when you're facing short-term disruptions and possible long-term declines in competitiveness, you develop strategies and you take actions, provided, of course, that what is happening matters. And there can be very little doubt that what is happening in this area matters to this country. We are still the world's largest consumer of oil, again, highlighted by the transportation sector, which consumes 70% of the nation's oil requirement. There is still a world oil price that, even with us being the #1 producer, we cannot control. No country can control, except for maybe the OPEC plus countries who try. The automotive sector that Admiral Blair talked about, that today sustains 10 million American jobs, has in each of 24 states more than 100,000 automotive jobs, needs to be preserved. And the world is moving, whether anyone likes it or not, to a digitized, electrified future. That is a challenge. That is also the opportunity, as I mentioned, and it needs to be seized. The role of batteries and motors and other components have become increasingly critical, and you've heard and you will continue to hear today that China is aggressively moving across the entire terrain to seize advantage. So it definitely matters, and the United States needs to raise its game. Thank you, and Robbie, back to you.
Thank you again, Admiral Blair, General Conway, and Mr. Goldstein for all your leadership over the years. Oil dependence has been a malignant problem for the US since the 1970s, when we woke up to this issue. As you've heard, it has driven or constrained much of our foreign policy since then, and its volatility has significantly impacted the economy. It is dependence on a single fuel transportation fuel, one that is traded and priced on a manipulated market, that is the defining point of this dependence. It is why SAFE has advocated for diversifying fuel sources into the transportation sector, including a focus on electrification. EVs have 4 characteristics that meet the criteria we believe make it important to national security. These are diverse and domestic fuel sources to produce electricity. The prices for electricity are stable, and there is a national infrastructure for electricity that can serve the backbone of fueling. SAFE is always assessing new technologies and business models. As we are not tied to just one, we are a mission-driven organization. We currently see a convergence between 4 technologies that have created a revolution in transportation: telecommunications, battery technology, sensors, and big data. As you can see in this graphic, connected, autonomous, shared, and electric are attributes that could be a force multiplier, reinforcing and accelerating each other. It is this consumer proposition which fundamentally changes transportation and thus accelerates change. Cars and trucks in the future are going to be electric, connected, and likely autonomous. China, in its Made in China 2025 strategy, has clearly seen this and has smartly and deliberately taken control of this critical parts of the supply chain and is looking to dominate the auto and transportation industry. This should concern us all. The auto industry has been the foundation of our industrial base. There are over 10 million direct and indirect jobs in the auto industry and over 1 million jobs in the trucking manufacturing sector. The commanding heights of global transportation we are issuing today addresses this question with recommendations that accelerate the United States in this race, because we are currently behind China, Asia, and Europe. As one battery analyst said to the US Senate, we are in the midst of a global battery arms race in which the United States is presently a bystander. We offer today, in the commanding heights of global transportation, a minerals to market strategy, because that is the only way this will work. If we do not develop a strong EV market, it will be difficult to build a world-class vehicle manufacturing sector and secure control of the supply chain. We have to develop an ecosystem. If we only focus on the deployment of vehicles, we risk losing millions of jobs in car, truck, and battery facilities, and also giving strategic leverage over supply chains to other countries. I want to spend the next few minutes walking through the components of the electric vehicle recommendations, and I'll then spend a few minutes on the policies that are needed to lead AVs, connectivity, and 5G. The electric car and its batteries are pretty simple. This is one reason that China has not chosen to focus on competing with the US and our Western allies on internal combustion engine cars. Over 100 years head start makes it difficult for China to catch up. The internal combustion engine has as many as 2,000 parts, while the electric vehicle is pretty simple with essentially a battery and a motor. We need to focus on 1, minerals, both rare earth and other critical minerals. 2, processing and refining those minerals. 3, battery components like anodes, cathodes, battery cells. 4, permanent magnets for the motors. And 5, manufacturing the vehicles in the United States. We face different challenges with rare earths and other critical minerals. Rare earth minerals are not rare, but are used in very small amounts and are found in very low concentrations in the earth. They are used for permanent magnets for motors and other high-tech equipment with defense and non-defense products. The critical minerals are found in much higher concentrations and used in larger quantities in the manufacture of EVs and batteries. These include nickel, lithium, cobalt, and graphite. The policies will be different for each type of mineral. China currently mines more than half of rare earth minerals and processes nearly 90%. Even the rare earth minerals mined in the US today are sent to China for processing. The US can and should encourage mines in Mountain Pass, California, but must also focus on processing. We propose a policy that promotes a rare earth processing cooperative that will be owned by companies that consume the rare earth. The cooperative will have the guaranteed customers and an incentive to operate efficiently. We can use tailings from other mines in the US, like phosphate tailings in Florida, or mined rare earths themselves. A single private company cannot do this because China will undercut their price. China can do so because it is cheaper to process in China due to lax labor and environmental standards. China is not looking to maximize profits in this sector, but maximize control over this market. It should be noted that Beijing has estimated that it would cost $5.5 billion in just one province to remediate the environmental damage. We need policies like antitrust exemptions to allow users and minerals to work together as a cooperative. The other minerals I mentioned, lithium, graphite, nickel, cobalt, are in the US in different quantities. The US must allow for the mining of these minerals where possible. It takes 2 to 3 years to open a mine in Canada and Australia, but 10 years in the US, if ever. The environmental community, they need to recognize that devices that consume renewable energy often cannot themselves be made from renewable resources. We need these resources to be built to build the EVs and battery storage that can clean up transportation and enable a renewable grid. We have high environmental standards, but then lean towards securing part of the supply chain. The Commanding Heights offers policies in this process. We also need to be focused on recycling and new battery chemistries. The minerals in the batteries can be used over and over again if recycled. Think about this. Unlike oil and fossil fuels that get depleted when burned, minerals can be recovered from used batteries and used in new batteries over and over again. Though a battery degrades, a battery made from recycled minerals is as good as new. So we need to focus on this recycling. We could end dependence on the need for foreign minerals and never face a supply threat once we have all the minerals and resources we need in the United States, if we are then committed to recycle them and use them over and over. We propose a code on each battery to make it easier to know what's inside for recycling and tax credits to promote recycling. As this industry gets ready for the first generation of batteries to be taken out of early EVs, we can have a closed loop resource system, and we should strive for that. Finally, we need to continue to invest R&D in new chemistries that could both improve the performance of the batteries and lessen the dependence on these minerals that are not found in the US. For instance, solid-state batteries are more like microprocessors, which the US is very good at manufacturing. So this can help the US leapfrog others when it comes to batteries. We then need to focus on component parts, from anodes to cathodes to battery cells to battery packs and finally permanent magnets. The percentage of these components that are made in China are astounding. China produces more than 60% of cathodes, 80% of anodes. Further, China manufactures more than 70% of global lithium-ion battery cells, and compare this to less than 10% in the United States. We need batteries and motors to be manufactured in the United States, whether by American or foreign companies from allied nations. We offer a range of tax credit and loan guarantees to help the auto and truck sectors manufacturing industry retool. Several of these programs currently exist, but are not been fully used. We also recommend expanding these programs to medium and heavy duty vehicles, as well as to components for next generation autonomous vehicles like sensors. However, this supply chain requires a domestic market, or the supply chains and the technology will be developed somewhere else, closer to where that market exists. If the leading market is developing somewhere else, that R&D will be invested somewhere else, and the improvements one gets by manufacturing or learning by doing will happen somewhere else. It is an ecosystem that starts by having the leading market. which the US does not currently possess. We must give up our ideological predispositions and support the market itself. Currently, the US supports EVs in a limited fashion and only for cars. We need to think broader to all vehicle classes. While most internal combustion vehicles, diesel or gasoline, have a unique parts and the core components of batteries are the same no matter what type of vehicle they go into. So it is important to foster both car and truck market, as they both consume the same battery components and can share manufacturing infrastructure. In fact, it may be easier to work with companies and fleets rather than individual consumers. China has more than 500,000 electric buses compared to roughly 1,000 buses in the US. These buses have helped them build a massive battery industry. We recommend that we reform the 7,500 EV tax credit so that there is no longer a per manufacturer cap. We need to sell lots and lots and lots of EVs to build an upstream supply chain, and we should not limit those sales. It should be sunsetted, though, because the government should not support it forever. In addition, we need to add a tax credit for medium and heavy duty vehicles. These larger vehicles will require more battery cells, so fewer vehicles will jumpstart the battery supply chain by providing scale. We should also add money to the No-Low grant program and other grant programs to help public transit and public agencies transition. We should be using our support of public fleets more wisely, so we also get these national security benefits. I now want to transition to AVs and connected vehicles that are likely to be supported by 5G. We recommend that the US both set a regulatory pathway for these vehicles to create certainty for companies spending billions on research, development, and now some deployment. The Chinese government can just do this by fiat, so we need to move faster and offer regulatory clarity. In addition, we should allow companies to build up to 100,000 vehicles that are safe as current vehicles, but have different designs. The entire value of AVs, including environmental gains, can be achieved and come when we have different types of vehicles. Vehicles that can be purpose-built, which take out weight and saves fuel. Car companies can currently only build 2,500 cars with novel designs, but it's not enough for companies to truly rethink and retool as they get started. We need companies like Cruise, who's trying to bring out an entirely new type of vehicle, or Nuro and FedEx are trying to rethink contactless deliveries for our homes to make the United States the country in which they develop and deploy. The 5G issue is well-trod ground, and I'll not spend too much time talking about it, but clearly we need to make sure that we have a secure network in which increasingly connected vehicles can operate and that privacy is ensured. We should continue to allow the auto industry to keep its spectrum for safety. Other countries are operating in the spectrum, and we should not needlessly relinquish it now as we stand on the cusp of this transition. Finally, the auto industry has not only been the key to our industrial economy in the US, but also to our allied countries like Germany, France, Italy, Korea, and Japan. We need to work together to address the common challenges. We propose a forum where automakers can interact with one another on these key challenges related to supply chains in China without fear of antitrust issues. The US created the modern day industry when the first Ford Model T rolled off the assembly line in 1908. The auto industry was key to the US winning World War II as the arsenal of democracy, and now was recently mobilized again, retooling to make ventilators as the arsenal of health. We need a bipartisan mineral to markets approach to make sure we have a strong industry leading in technology with good paying jobs for whatever challenges may lay ahead for the US. Thank you, and I'll take your questions at the end of the program. So we were waiting for Congressman Swalwell, who is going to join us. So let's do something a little different here. Let's go to General Conway, 34th Commandant of the Marine Corps, co-chair of our Energy Security Leadership Council, to share some words with us now that you've heard the highlights of the report.
Thanks, Robbie. In 2010, when I was still on active duty, I commissioned a group of very talented guys and gals at Quantico to take a look at the world order during the period 2020 to 2025. And to tell me what it would look like, the obvious purpose was to understand how the Marine Corps could best support national policy during that period. They came away with a very interesting paper and some prescient observations, the most memorable of which was that they said by 2025, we would no longer have a single polar world, such as we had after the wall fell in 1989, but rather a multipolar world with Russia, China, the collective power of the Europeans, the United States, and the new player on the scene, India, all exerting influence. They said it would be toughest on the United States, on us, to make the adjustments in that new relationship amongst nations. My folks made the assumption that China would play by the international rules that govern powerful nations. Unfortunately, that has proved not to be the case. China was welcomed into the WTO in 2001 on hopes that she would become a powerful trading partner. Instead, we now know that China has been engaged in what I call Machiavellian warfare against Western nations, particularly the United States. In all phases that governed international relationships, economic, military, environmental, and geopolitical, I view that their policies have been deceitful, two-faced, cunning, and unscrupulous. China has fostered a 100-year plan, a 2030 plan, and multiple 5-year plans, all of which have one thing in common, that the end invariably justifies the means. Over the past decade, we've watched China lose an international courts battle to the Philippines only to ignore the findings. We have seen them declare sovereignty over great swaths of space and sea space and land space in the South China Sea with no authority to do so. And most recently, they have broken a 50-year deal with the UK on how Hong Kong would be governed before they got halfway through the process. On the economic front, for the last decade, we've watched China lure Western business into their country on the promise of access to that great market, only to have their state policies co-opt Western business practice and spend the time attempting to thieve their IP. And now COVID. The conscious spread of that terrible disease represents the boldest and, in my mind, the most irresponsible action ever by a foreign government. The international jury certainly still remains out on how it will be resolved, but I believe that there must be a reckoning. Admiral Yamamoto remarked famously in 1941 that his country had awakened a sleeping giant. Today, the giant is not sleeping, but it is distracted by internal bickering and partisan divide. Complacency and the associated rose-colored glasses that go with it have allowed a national security threat to once again loom large in the Asia Pacific. A collection of policies to counter the Chinese economic and military threat, to include the attempted seizure of future transportation systems, in my mind, is simply not enough. The most vitriolic of the Chinese leadership do not accept the United States and Western nations as competitors, but instead they view us as the enemy towards their long-term plans. In that context, it's my belief that the U.S. must also develop a national plan to deal with this Chinese threat to our national security. The plan must have economic, military, environmental, and geographic components. It must include partners and ally nations that see the threat the same way that we do. The plan must be bipartisan and not subject to elections every 2 or 4 years. And maybe most importantly, the plan needs to be based on a clear-eyed understanding of the Chinese and who they are and what they represent to us over the coming decades. I would argue at this point that my people in 2010 got it wrong. It's not the United States in 2020 that must make the difficult adjustments, because ominously, nowhere in the multiple Chinese communist plans for the future is there an emphasis on a multipolar world.